Yes.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up today in this wintry weather. This will be the first meeting of the Transportation Tax Advisory Meeting Committee, which was formed by the ordinance for the referendum to give the public a ability to have an input, ensure the public is informed of their investment status. I hope in this meeting we will address at least three things: development of the committee, given the guidelines, address continuality to account for changing in government, and development of stages to measure progress. I was talking to Ms. Gerald last night, and she brought out a good thing, is that this transportation committee is going to last at least 2050, which I'm sure no one's going to be, that's here today, is going to be here in 2050. The referendum stops in 2040, but after that you have 10 years. I would think that maybe we have roads being constructed and all that. So we have to think about that all the time. How do we continue it when no one else is here? How does the committee still meet and still inform the public of their investment? So from that, I'm going to give you our administrator. We'll go from there. Mr. Fulgram?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, you got a little bit of reverb or repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody hearing that?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Try it again.
Yeah, that's much better. That's much better. Thank you. I still hear it. Can we all just mute if we're not talking? Okay, is that better? Everyone's still here? Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The welcome and introductions. I suppose we want to make it known that the committee consists of the chairman of the county council, the two mayors of the two municipalities, and the chairperson of the school district board, Dr. Gerald. Those are the official members of the advisory committee, although staff is going to be heavily bolstering you up in your work that you do. We have a review of the committee's duties is one of the items on the agenda today, and you all have been provided with a copy of the ordinance, I believe. If you look on section 1, but page 2, the very last portion of page 2 and the beginning of page 3, it defines the advisory committee, and I just would like to go ahead and read it for you. It says, an advisory committee consisting of the county council chairperson, the mayor of Hardeeville, the mayor of the town of Ridgeland, and the chairperson of the Jasper County School District shall be formed and annually assess the projects proposed for construction, provide a recommendation to the county council for the ranking of projects, and with the assistance of county staff, prepare a report of the progress on and the status of each project for presentation to the local government councils. It also mentions that any of the above listed committee members may designate an elected member of their council or board to serve in their stead. So you do have that. Next thing on the agenda, Mr. Kemp, is sort of an overview of the transportation sales tax program as we see it. We had a successful program in 2016, and we're still finishing up some projects with that one. In 2024, the ordinance that you have was adopted back in July of 2024. The collection, as you said, will be for not to exceed 15 years, which would take you to April of 2040. Or if you reach the $470 million mark that was established as what maybe what the sales tax may yield. The ordinance was approved on November the 5th, and I'll remind you that the $470 million is broken down 80% or a $376 million for 16 individual road projects, defined as roadway construction, intersection improvements, roadway widening, and interchange improvements in those categories. And 20% or 94 million is slated for greenbelt projects, which are undefined at this point, but defined in the ordinance as including but not limited to purchasing of property for conservation, purchasing conservation easements, creating passive green space, creating active green space, protecting natural resources, protecting agricultural or heritage landscapes, and protecting scenic corridors. The ordinance also authorized the council to bond up to $150 million for these projects. And so we find ourselves sort of at the point of what's next. Now that it's passed and we're moving forward, as I see it, there are really two categories. One is the road projects and one of the greenbelt projects. That's why we have some of our guests here with us today. We have Mr. Jim Iwaniki, who is the Director of Engineering Services for Jasper County. Jim was recently brought on. He is a PE, and he will be in charge of working up a arrangement with a program manager that will serve as extended staff to him in managing the road projects. On the greenbelt side, as I said, it's yet to be defined how we do that. We need to come up with a recommendation to the county council on a method for establishing a matrix or a scoring of projects and defining priorities of those projects. We don't have that infrastructure in place currently in Jasper County. So that's why we have Kate Schaefer here today from the Open Land Trust. We have been working on some potential ideas and options for you in that regard. Ms. Jennifer Bragg served as a consulting engineer for us in creating the project lists of the road projects, defining those, working with the municipalities to define those. So she's available for questions as well. So, Mr. Chairman, if it'd be all right, we can move on to Mr. Iwaniki, just giving an update of where he is and what he sees as next as we move forward on the road projects.
Mr. Kemp, you're muted, but I'm assuming you told me to go ahead. So this is all pretty fast and furious, but last week I met with Craig Wynn from SCDOT, and we had a discussion about coming up with an IGA that SCDOT would start to write for these projects. All of the road projects are on SCDOT right away and under their ownership. So again, they have to be heavily involved. So they are starting to work on that intergovernmental agreement. As of that phone call last week, there's some back and forth that we will go on that. I would suspect that we would probably see that IGA come before the county council. My guess would be somewhere in April, Mayish, June timeframe. It's going to take a while to develop it, and but we are currently working on that. The other thing that we need to put in place, or two other things that we need to put in place, is there are federal funds that might be available for these projects. They're all federal aid eligible. There are some of them that are currently on the LATS TIP, the Transportation Improvement projects. We need to become a local public agency through SCDOT so that we can help administer those federal funds. And so I also talked to Craig about that. To do that and to help run this program, as Andy said, we have identified a need to come up with a program manager, somebody to be county staff helpers, somebody that can manage the projects, not only from an engineering standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, and to make sure that we can keep consultants and contractors on the straight and narrow. So I've started working on a request for proposals for a program manager. I would see that we would probably get that out to prospective consultants probably mid-February would be my guess right now. Getting proposals back in mid-March, and then scoring those proposals and awarding in April or early May would be my guess of timeframes. One thing that we have talked about internally that I would like some input from this committee on is the scoring of those proposals. I think it would be important to have the cities definitely involved in having a representative help determine who that program manager is in that scoring process. And then on the school board side, I don't know if it's as critical, but would invite, if the school board wanted to have a member in on that scoring process, would invite you to submit somebody that could help score those. And so if that is the interest of the members of this committee, I would just need to know that so that I can put that in the RFP so that the consultants would know who was going to score and how things were going to be scored. So that's what I got for an initial report right now. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any
Mr. Chair?
questions?
Jim,
Mr.
is there a
Director,
specific number of people you'd be looking for to create the scoring committee, or just one from Hardyville? Is that sufficient?
I was thinking one from Hardyville and one from Ridgeland, and then I would be on that committee, and then we would have Kim on that committee. And then again, if the school board wanted to have somebody, again, I would invite them to send somebody, but I don't think that's as necessary as having the two cities.
I would think that it would aid understanding how the project would impact the school district if you have a member on that committee, because we transport our students all up and down the county, and I don't think people understand the brevity of the situation. So we will send someone to serve on that committee.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Chairman, if I
question?
may, Jim has laid out sort of the process of looking for and hiring a program manager. And in my view, the program manager would be responsible for not only those road projects that you all choose, but also any infrastructure projects that may be on the Greenbelt side that are active recreation projects. In other words, if you were doing trails or physical projects or boat landings or fishing piers or things like that, that group would be helping Jim in administering those projects as well. That's the way I see that working going forward.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, then knowing that we've talked a little bit about the roadside, the larger, heavier lift probably is the Greenbelt side, since all that's yet to be defined. And again, what we're ultimately going to be looking for from the committee is a recommendation to County Council about a program and how we should run this program. And Mr. Chairman, would it be all right if we allow Ms. Schaefer to speak about some discussions that we've had about potential options there?
Go right ahead. Kate, you're on. Unmute, please.
Okay, great. And I do have a friend in the room who will be here in 2050, Chairman Kemp. So we can keep that in mind too. So with respect to the Greenbelt side of this initiative, you know, I think successful programs do not define specific projects on referendums because if you name what properties you want to protect, the price only increases. But that successful programs also rely on a series of quantitative and qualitative mapping to identify priorities and to make sure that the money spent does address Greenbelt priorities for Jasper County. We have a series of quantitative and qualitative mapping that is available to the county from the Conservation Bank. They are a state agency that invests in this mapping initiative with South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and can be presented to the council, as well as fine tuning locally with the Port Royal Sound Foundation, which has mapped the watershed, the local watershed, with more excruciating detail. So just to kind of start with an idea of where we're going, those mapping resources being presented to the committee and used in the creation of identifying goals and a scoring rubric for what makes a successful project will be incredibly important, as well as recommendations to the committee about those rubrics specifically. So, you know, with this money available for conservation, what are we trying to achieve? Is there a categorical, you know, percentage of Jasper County we want to see protected, or, you know, a categorical identification in some other way, and then in the scoring rubric in terms of what makes a good project. With that, I think would come, you know, some ordinances and definitions for these things. So how do you define an applicant for this money? How do you define what the appropriate due diligence is? By way of example, at the state level, an applicant is defined as a state agency and or an accredited land trust for conservation bank expenditures. Oh, a municipality is an applicant. A county can be an applicant, and but not the landowner himself or herself. And then the required due diligence at the state level when you submit those applications to the state agency is, you know, an appraisal, title commitment, a bona fide survey that can document the metes and bounds of the property, and a phase one environmental analysis. If it's a fee simple property, you also need a purchase contract. So just share those by way of examples. I think those will be things to expect in future kind of ordinances that guide the program. But as far as starting it up and, you know, having that program manager equivalent that you all will see on the transportation side, I think it is important to have, you know, a designated process and a point person that's familiar with financials and the county's goals. But then there's also the opportunity, just like on the transportation side, to put out requests for proposals to work with conservation, you know, interests who can manage this. The Open Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, individuals have all done this in some way, shape, or form for Beaufort County's Rural and Critical Program or other programs in Berkeley and Dorchester counties. And so I think setting those parameters would be something that we could bring forward to the committee to help establish the program. But then once the parameters, the scoring rubric, you know, the definition of applicants and due diligence is established, it's then really up to the conservation partners and those eligible to bring forward good projects. And I think what this committee would ultimately be tasked with is, you know, making sure those projects align with the goals and the scoring rubric. And if they do, that's an easy answer. And if they don't, then you know that's not how the ordinance or the referendum has asked you to spend your money. And you know that's not what the public said we want to how we want to spend our money. So really establishing the parameters of what an application looks like and setting that process in place is going to be the most important to get this going. And then the conservation community and eligible applicants can follow with great projects. As a staff member at the Open Land Trust, I'm happy to assist in whatever way makes sense.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Mayor. You're muted.
Thank you, John. I had a couple of questions I was writing as Kate was talking. So I guess these are directed at Kate. Is there any or who establishes a at least theoretical um, uh, philosophy or objective? How much of the 94 million will go to buying to preserve land versus projects, as Andy said earlier, boat landings and things like that, res easements, recreation easements and things like that. Is there, or is, and who established it is if there's no guideline at this point?
I'll take the first stab at that and then turn it over to Andy. I would recommend that you not restrict yourself too greatly at the beginning with like dollar amounts or percentage amounts for these different buckets of types of projects. Conservation easements, as you know, are less expensive because you're not owning the property. Infrastructure costs can be different than land acquisition costs, and so it's sometimes you could find yourself in an apples and oranges situation that is not productive by being too restrictive. But as far as, who determines ultimately what is an eligible expenditure, it's the referendum language, and then the recommendation of the council. Um, that's general and specific. But I would recommend, and I think one of the things that can be done in timing concert and in sequence with the transportation planning is that um, you know we can we can bring the mapping resources back to you and say, okay, here's the gaps of, maybe publicly owned land, conservation easement land, agricultural land, or whatever, and identify those gaps and make recommendations based on, where you may want to be most aggressive in filling those gaps. But then also some of it is going to be temporal in terms of land owners and when it's available and, funding partners and those types of things. So I wouldn't be too specific in like you have $1.6 million exclusively for this category if you don't have to be.
Thanks, Kate.
Andy.
The second question, as you're going through all the things that need to be done, it struck me just like we need to hire a manager that knows all those technical things. Do we need to hire a manager to put all those elements into place that Kate was outlining?
Andy, I think you can answer that. I think we talked about that. Andy, could you expound upon that?
Sure, I can. Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, I think the answer is yes, maybe. We're looking at how Kate's organization and her relationship with Beaufort County works, and we're thinking that we need to do some research, more research on it, and bring back some recommendations to you. Back to your earlier question about percentages or how much you want to spend on projects versus conservation easements and fee simple purchases and so forth. I would agree with Kate. You have a very broad definition now. I'd like you to keep it broad if you there's no harm in doing that. But you're gonna have two things. You're gonna be faced with some recommendations about how we think as staff it might work. We'll give you some options to choose from to recommend to county council. And then ultimately, once they adopt an ordinance about how they want to handle these projects, then it's going to come right back to you to pick the priorities. So you'll be the ones determining what the priorities are once we get the program defined.
And by
Thank
priorities,
you.
I would just again remind you that would most likely look like a list of qualities about a property or project, not a specific project. But that scoring rubric that can be applied to the specific categories of investment is going to be your guiding document.
By the way, Kate, I just wanted to say, when I was saying about the 50s and nobody being here, I was really talking about the elected officials. They may not be here, they may be here. Uh,
That's okay.
please,
I'm not
I don't want to
offended.
get credited that
I'm
way.
I might not be. I
In
don't know.
fact,
I
I
don't
see your
know.
daughter in the background, and I'm thinking maybe that she's the one that's going to come up next.
She might be. She chose to adopt my husband's career for career day, so maybe she's not going to be here either. I don't know. But no offense taken.
Okay, just want to be clear. What is next?
Mr. Chairman, we had just transportation green belt priorities on there. It's kind of unfair to ask you all this. You don't have much information at all, but I was just curious if you had some priorities, at least from the road list that you have been thinking about. We'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Mayor?
Well, I've been thinking quite a bit about this, and um, I personally think, first of all, that we need to set out, all those projects and put a tentative priority on them, and I think that's the mandate of this committee to determine that. Um, I think the low-hanging fruit is Argent Boulevard for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's identified on LATS, and number two is identified as part of the Triangle project. And number three, quite frankly, the the voting public, that was where majority of the votes came from. That was the one of their biggest concerns. Um, and another reason is uh, Josh and I spoke too. We went up to LoCog and we're talking about what has to be done. There's a lot of design and engineering that has to go onto that project, and because LATS already has that on the list, that may be the easiest thing to get going right away. So not only I think is one of the greatest needs, it's also one of the things that have some impetus already to get started. But beyond that, and I think that that $57 million that's earmarked for that road certainly is well below the $57 million, and it's going to take a couple years. So, whatever design and engineering funds we need, we could get going right away or relatively quickly on that once we have a manager in place and DOT, gives all the approvals. Um, the other secondary, which I think, for lack of a better term, low-hanging fruit, is I think we should um, acknowledge the long-suffering community of Levy and take that $10 million, whatever that was engineered for. I think that would be an easy thing to manage and engineer and get going right away. Beyond those first two, my other thought was, because Beaufort County did not pass their referendum, while I would say the 67 million devoted to the widening of I-95 was a high priority, or not I-95, excuse me, 278. I think we have to find out now, particularly from DOT, if we did undertake that project, could we, given the fact that Beaufort County doesn't have the funds to widen from the county line to 278, which was part of the overall plan for the triangle. So that's a question I have, and I think the answer to that question will determine where that particular project falls in the order of priority. I would also think for a number of reasons, um, with the immense industrial zone going on in the southern part of the county, the corridor going from 46, 170, 315, and the widening of 17, picking up where the current widening is taking place up to 170, there's approximately $105 million devoted to that. That's going to take a lot of engineering. It's going to take time. And perhaps once we hire this manager, that would be another project that I would say has a priority to start the design and engineering, because it's going to take a couple of years. We know that. Um, and also that's going to be an increasing valuable evacuation route as exit 3 becomes a reality in 4 or 5 years. So to me, those are important priorities. I think also after that, 462 is a also part of an evacuation route, and an area that I know people have expressed concern about a lot. Beyond that, that I can't speak to the rest of the projects north, in the middle of the Ridgeland and north. I would have to defer to someone more knowledgeable of those projects. But that's my initial thinking. Let's design and engineer as quickly as possible. As soon as the manager gets on and DOT gives their approvals, let's start that design and engineering. And if we have to use the bonding capability to do so, a couple $1 million, I would urge that. And I think it's important that the public see that we've started something, even if it's just design.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Joyce Gerald. I, to some degree, agree with Mayor Williams, but I am going to address what happens to this side of Hardeeville when I-95 is congested. No one can get to their homes on this side of Hardeeville because 321 is very narrow. It's congested. The traffic is unbelievable when I-95 is closed going south specifically. Buses cannot get anywhere. Never mind buses. People can't get anywhere. Case in point, the last time that occurred, it took me 12 minutes to be able to cross 321 to where I live in Perrysburg. And if that had occurred during the time when students were supposed to be transported home, they wouldn't have been able to get home until 8, if that, when it happens late in the afternoon. We need to consider the main roads that go from north in Jasper to south in Jasper. And the one road that trucks use a lot is 321. When they were repairing the bridge, the state was repairing the bridge that crosses the railroad crossing and 321. The traffic was also horrific because the road is not wide enough. It's one lane going north, one lane going south. With all the other exit 3 plans for transporting those trucks, visualize that when that becomes a reality. And we're evacuating. And 321 is a major road for evacuating for everyone on this side of the county and on this end of the county. And it's the easiest way to evacuate. If you live downtown, you just come straight through town, across the railroad tracks, and then exit up 321. But if the road is not wide enough, is not stable enough, which it is not, has huge potholes. The state basically just fills the cracks, and science tells you expansion and contraction occurs when water is in the cracks. Water freezes, it just expands and breaks apart the little patches that they're putting on that road. So we need to consider 321. I would think even more so than, not to say anything about Levy, but 321 goes from one end of Jasper County all the way to the other end of Jasper County. And it is a major road, especially if a report becomes a reality that we're being told it will become, and those trucks will be driving up and down that road. We need to think ahead and not just for immediacy. A lot of people live on this side of Jasper County and also on this side of Hardeeville. So we have to consider everything and not just pockets of scenarios that are being presented. Thank you.
But I don't think 321 is widening. Is there? It's
And
pockets,
that's
but
the
not
problem.
321 total. And the state just paved that and opened it up a little bit, made it a little bit safer.
But it's not
And
widened. That's the problem. There's only one lane going one way, one lane coming the other.
right, but according to the referendum, we don't have that in there. We have to go by what the referendum said. Am I
So
correct with that? Without an ordinance to replace it?
That's correct, sir. That's correct. That widening of 321 is not an option. It's not among the projects in the road list. There are some small intersection improvement projects that are on involve 321, but no widening.
So that would help a lot. And so putting them last is not the problem on this side of the county at all. I did not read the full detail of your referendum, so I wasn't aware of the necessity of not including in detail 321, but it is something that needs to be considered in terms of the exits that are going on to 321. Let's put it that way.
You know, I think this is a moving situation. We could consider that if, for example, in the last referendum, the state took some of the projects that we had and we had freed up the money. And I think that could be, we should have that as a backup. And I think we did have that. We had over $1 billion worth of projects or something like that when we first started, and we cut it back. But anyway, I I think that's the point of it is we're going to prioritize, and if something happens, and again, when we widen 278, the state is now doing the exit 8 for 3 lanes, or for 2 lanes, excuse me. And we're going to, when this referendum comes, we're going to have to redo that whole intersection again, or that part of the road again. So it's a work in progress, I guess. And sometimes the priorities go, and sometimes they have to be put in the back burner just to satisfy the whole picture on it. So anyway, I do agree that Argent Boulevard, uh, Levy is in my heart, and they've suffered enough with all the everything on going on down there. And if you ever go to Savannah, the back roads, it's a mess
Yes.
down there. And widening that would be beneficial down there. And that's it. That's my 2 cents worth. I just think that this meeting is really not to say, okay, we're going to set priorities, but just to discuss it and set up a network or a framework to how can we do this. And once we get the person aboard, then we can start going into the weeds a little bit. We can
Yes.
discuss it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to get see if Jim would comment on that. We've had some discussion about. I know it's probably unfair, and I appreciate the mayor's um, discussing priorities as he sees them. Um, but it would be helpful if Jim had just a loose idea of what your priorities were, so he can maybe incorporate that into his hiring of program manager and get that going as quickly as possible. Jim, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think, again, if the sooner we can identify some priorities, if we can put those in the RFP, that would be wonderful. But if not, we're going to need them very quickly, so that we know where to be spending our time and resources. One of the things that the mayor brought up was Argent Boulevard. I had some discussions with our LATS people and with, again, Craig Wynn at SC Dot. There's pluses and minuses for federal aid, using federal aid on these projects. Obviously, there might be some additional funds that might be brought to bear. But when we bring those federal aid dollars in, we need to make sure that we follow that federal process from the start to the finish. And when we do that, we are using federal dollars. We're going to spend a little bit more time and effort on the permitting and clearing projects, to make sure that there are no federally recognized impacts. Whereas if we just use our 1 penny money, we can avoid some of those headaches. So there's pluses and minuses with federalizing the projects. And again, I think that's something that if we can bring that program manager on and let them evaluate whether, hey, this is one that we want to maybe capture those additional dollars, or no, that those additional dollars are just going to equal the expense that we're going to get. I think that's something that we need to determine before we think about adding federal dollars to it. So I wanted to bring that up. So again, the better and the quicker the list I can get, the program manager can help us out. And again, it's making sure that we have the money to do the upfront engineering. And I think that's a great idea on these bigger projects. Like the mayor said, as soon as we can get that engineering started, that's probably something that we want to do. But then is there other things that we want to do, some of these intersection projects, so that we can get some asphalt down on the ground a little bit quicker? And does that help the politics? And again, I think that's why this committee was put together, is to make sure that the politics align with what the engineers think. So those are my thoughts on it.
Jim, have you, this is for the mayor and I guess and Jim, you had, Hardyville had done several studies on Argent Boulevard, correct? Harry?
We've done speed studies, and studies for the lights, but we have not done any engineering studies, design studies. I'm not sure how the 57 million was determined. So there's no, the city's only done speed studies. Josh, am I speaking correctly?
Correct, sir. None of the actual engineering or design work has been done as far as the corridor itself. There's been some spots with the intersections where we've done some of that work, but nothing for the entire length of Argent. And so, just to kind of piggyback on that and to quantify some of Jim's comments, to put some numbers to it, if we do stick with using federal funds, the NEPA process is going to dictate somewhere in the neighborhood of an additional presumably 12 to 18 months just from the environmental permitting side of things before you can then really get into the design work. And so as a threshold question, if we are going to use federal funds, it's probably a minimum of 3 to 4 years before we see any shovels being ready to go in the ground for a project such as that.
But in the long run, was it worth it? This is Joyce Gerald.
It certainly is, but we've got to be cognizant of the fact of the safety conditions that are out there now. And what we saw in Beaufort County is if we can't show some tangible progress on these, we start losing the trust of the public, and it just makes any kind of future projects or programs that more difficult to try to implement. So the sooner that we can get some of these projects going and show some actual momentum within the community, I think the better it's going to be for the program as a whole.
Yeah.
So
Having
what
said that,
we're saying is federal dollars will delay. So it depends on what project you want to use federal dollars on. Because I'm sure that every road is not going to have federal money coming to it. Is that correct?
no,
Correct.
no.
We could use the referendum money for, let's say, Argent Boulevard. Don't have to go through federal. And then something like Levy, we could go to Levy and use that as federal, or 315 or 321 intersections or something like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would that be easier on the smaller projects than the bigger projects?
The smaller projects, it's easier to keep the money with the one penny. The bigger projects are, I think, ones that you won't want to talk about the federal dollars. And again, does the federal dollars, is there enough that can be brought to bear to justify extension and the additional cost? Extension of time getting shovels in the ground. And again, there will be additional cost, especially on the engineering side and the permitting side to clear those projects.
Not to mention the paperwork. I was a federal director for the county for years, so yeah, I understand.
To put it in perspective, when I was in Michigan, if we could keep federal dollars out of the project, we saved 15 to 20% on construction engineering and construction costs. Now, I don't think it will be as much here in South Carolina because we're going to have to still follow all of SC DOT's construction practices and their construction engineering practices. But again, I think we're probably saving about 10% would be my ballpark figure if we can keep it a local project instead of federalizing it. That would be my assumption right now.
So really what we have to do is really think about that next meeting, give you a set of priorities, or do we have to do it now?
I think we have a little time, but again, as Andy said, if we can kind of say, hey, here's the ones we think are the most important, and if I can work on those to start with, and at least put that maybe in the RFP that these are the ones that might come quickly. Again, that's going to help that program manager figure out the workload and what resources they're going to need to bring to bear to start with. Obviously, if we say we want everything done within the first 3 years, that program manager is going to have to spend a lot more resources up front rather than if these projects are metered over a little bit of time.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. You're on mute.
As to the last statement, they're going to have to be metered over time because we need $376 million and we only, have 150 million to bond. So they have to be, the money has to be collected. So it has to be metered over time and perhaps metered over 15 years because that's potentially what it's going to take us to collect the money, unless, Bucky's comes quicker than we thought. My question is, Mr. Chair, we have four, I'll call them voting members of the established committee by ordinance. How do we determine what process would you like to see in order to get Jim the consensus priority list of this committee? Should we all list in order the project priorities that we would like to see, and then submit them to you and do some sort of vote? What process to come up with these priorities do you envision?
I would say that before the next meeting, you come up with 4 projects. Don't go over the whole thing. Just do the 4 projects. That's the reason we kept this committee the way it is, small, so we could manipulate and we could go faster. So, and we all represent the people. Several things that I've thought about is, first of all, political, meaning where do we get the biggest bang? I don't want another bridge where it comes up and we just keep on going and going and going and going, and then it gets nowhere. So we have to consider that. Optics, which goes first, which is needed, and where can we show everybody that we're doing something rather than just getting money. It looks like we're not doing anything. So that's 2. And third is what does our constituents want? So we have to get out there and talk a little bit and say, hey, here's what it is, and go over the list. We have the list and the agenda. You just got it here in the agenda. There's the list there. Take 4 projects from each one of us, and we'll have another meeting. And we go from there. This was not set up, at least my way, was not set up to make a decision, but just to set up a procedure and let everybody know what's going on. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
As I recall, the committee is set up, any decision is up to county council. It's, we're just a recommending body. And that's why we didn't go for an odd number of people, that we didn't think it was that important, if you recall the conversation. So I think we're just coming up with a list that by consensus of the 4 of us, we're sending to county council. But, Jim brought up politics, and John, you brought it up too. You're right. I think we have to show the public that we are moving forward and rewarding them for passing this referendum, and that we just can't, we have to show progress. And even if that progress means, establishing the priorities and sending it on to council. But I also think it's important, and the political reality of, if you look at the results of the election, the people along the 278 Argent Boulevard corridor is where the highest voter turnout was, and was the place that got the referendum passed. 56% of the voters come from that area. 56% of the voters in Jasper County. So I think it's important, if we want to come back to any referendum in 15 years, that we do not make the mistakes of Beaufort County, and that we at least show the people that we're going forward. And as far as asking them what they want, John, you and I were out on the stump for months. They want Argent Boulevard fixed, and that's the majority of what people that voted for this are asking for. So I think, that has to be kept in consideration as the county council approves this priority list.
Excuse me, Kate, you're muted. Kate, you're
Okay,
muted.
well, I would not be authentic to my true self if I did not take advantage of the opportunity to also remind you, from the conservation perspective, the fact that those projects can move forward in nearer time, just in general, and that the public widely supported the conservation initiatives, both in the internal polling that was done prior, and in the comparison between the Beaufort and Jasper referendum language itself. I think we know there is strong public support for the conservation side of the coin too. I think you have that in your favor politically. And if we're talking about the politics and we're talking about the urgency and the accountability to the voters to deliver on the momentum of the vote and the near-term success of the program, don't forget that the conservation successes can be part of that near-term message. And I think a really meaningful part of the public as we attempt to do both, which is manage growth and protect what we love. We're solving problems on all fronts by being able to employ transportation and conservation dollars. And I just pledge to continue to be the drumbeat of that reminder. But I think it truly resonates with the voters. And that is only going to help the accountability to the public and the responsiveness that I think you'll continue to see.
I agree 100% with Kate.
I do too, but problem is we have projects already on the board, whereas conservation does not, and we do not have a framework yet of how we do that. So that's the next part of it. Right now, we're discussing transportation. And I would like everybody to say no more transportation tax, but transportation investment. Because this is an investment. You know, and I learned from the conservation people one thing: words mean something. You
Yes.
know, and investment. We're investing in Jasper County. So it's not a transportation tax anymore. It's a transportation investment.
Chairman Kemp, I think there's another.
To really talk to about what the mayor said, yes, but we are gonna have a big influence on the county. It's just not the county anymore. It is the region. In fact,
Yes.
I would say that if the Beaufort passed their referendum, they'd be part of us some way, somehow. They would have a delegate or a person here to talk about it. So don't say just Hardyville or Ridgeland or Jasper. It is Jasper in total. And I believe that, and that's what I was voted in for, and that's what I'm going to go for. So anyway, we do have a progress to say we're going to, if everybody agrees, the first 4 projects. Next time we'll have a better understanding of how the conservation goes, hopefully. And we'll go from there. Does anybody have any other questions?
Mr.
Chairman
Chair, I
Kemp?
have a question for Mr. Folger.
Excuse me?
I have a question for Andy.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I heard, and I'm not sure if I heard this clearly, that this is just a referendum. Did you not do a bond? Are you going to do a bond?
That's part of, I encourage you to read the ordinance that we sent over. It does authorize the county council to bond up to $150 million for the projects. The county council has not discussed that yet. We will likely seek a recommendation from the committee as well in that regard. So that is another piece of work that we will do. We will bring you some information from our bond counsel about what they think is appropriate in that regard.
I asked that question because I read that section of the actual document that you sent us. And having gone through that process as a district, that is the fastest way to get your projects completed.
Yes, ma'am.
That's what we did to build the K-12 campuses that we have on both ends of the district. So 15 years is when it will expire, but the funds will come in faster, much faster through the bond. That's
Yes,
why we
ma'am.
chose that.
Thank you.
So I just wanted clarity on that. Thank you.
Is there any final thoughts?
Chairman Kemp, just one more
Yeah.
thought is just because something is the #1 priority doesn't mean it will be constructed first. I think that message has to be sent out
Clear.
there too. Because if we say Argent is number one and it might take a little bit longer to get done, then it may be an intersection project, or as Kate had suggested, some of those greenbelt projects. So again, I think that how that messaging goes out, here's our priorities, but just because something is priority number one, that doesn't mean it will be completed first. I think that has to be messaged as this program goes on.
Well, it doesn't mean that we can't do two projects at once, and I'm not mistaken on that. So you have one project that's, let's say, Archer Boulevard, because that seems to be the least important, most important, I think. And then we could do Levy, which would be a faster and show something, or 315, or an intersection, or whatever.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm.
they're both in the same process.
Yeah, one might be because of the engineering, we can start within a year. The other one might be 3 years down the road, but that doesn't mean it's any less of a priority.
And hence, that's why we have this committee to inform people. Yes, we're doing, let's say, Oregon Boulevard, we're doing the engineering now. Engineering is ready to go. Now we're putting it out. So we have a progression, just like they did on 95 and widening. I mean, they had projects, they had stages where they would say, okay, we're going to tell people what we're doing. And that's what we need to do. So
This is Jennifer.
when do we have, how long do you need, Mr. Fulgram or Andy? How long do you need until the next meeting? Or Jim, one of the two of you?
I think Jim wants some priority projects, and those are your priorities as a committee, right? With your understanding, as Jim put it. Once the program manager is on board, they may turn it around and say, no, you have a great opportunity with a federal grant here. You may have an opportunity to package these for infrastructure bank financing, all those kinds of things. And then they will show you what they think is the smartest way to leverage your money to get to where you want to be. And as you said, Mr. Kemp, you'll be able to explain that to the public as to why those factors will lead into the ultimate progression of the projects. So I don't think you all need too much time to define, I believe you said 4 projects as your priorities for the road projects. Kate and I need to do some work and come back to you with some recommendations. Kate, what do you think is a reasonable time frame for that?
Thank you. Jennifer,
Um,
do you have anything to
we can
say?
work
You've been there
at your
quiet
time frame.
all this meeting. Do you want to say something? You're muted.
I was going to build on what Jim had mentioned a minute ago about priorities, and he's correct. From the standpoint of, he is right, Argent will take longer. Argent on the corridor will need right of way. Obviously, the number of properties that require acquisition for right of way also feed into the timeline of a project, where you could start Argent day one and at the same time get some of these other projects like intersection improvements. You still may need right of way on an intersection improvement, but if you only need 4 or 5 parcels versus 20, 30, 40, 50, that timeline gets shorter. So I do agree, you could start multiple projects from an engineering perspective and the permitting process, because while you may not have NEPA, you may still require a wetland permit involving the Corps in coordination with that, which can still factor into the timeline of your project. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at project priorities.
So we need another meeting. Why don't everybody that's on here, and I'll get a hold of Ridgeland since they're not on here, give me 3 dates, or send Andy Fulgram 3 dates that we'll set up another meeting. Hopefully this will not be virtual.
Mr. Chairman, we need a little time to pull together some recommendations for you and get that information from bond counsel and so forth. So can you give a little parameter about when those dates ought to be? We're looking
Well,
at 30, 60 days out.
Well, I thought it within next February, sometime in February,
We're gonna
end
need
of
more.
February. Is that enough time for you?
If it would be at the end of the month, I think it might be.
Okay, give me 3 dates at the end of February. I mean, right now we have to, it's the process, it has, we're feeling our way around. Maybe the next meeting we'll have more information on the conservation. We'll have the 4 projects and we can give it to Jim and stuff like that. Any other comments?
You need a motion, Mr. Chair, to proceed with the that we should submit 4 projects and submit dates at the end of February, or we're not going to be that formal.
I don't think we should be that formal unless you require it.
I don't think formality
I think
is
we're all,
necessary.
it's not we're a committee. We're not bringing anything forward yet. Maybe when we bring forward to the county council, we'll do it in a resolution or a vote. But other than that, I don't think right now. Let's not be formal. Let's be able to speak to each other and not have to be formal about it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could I be so bold as to just throw a date or two out there? Are you all prepared to check your calendars and see if we can establish a date?
Yes.
I have my calendar. And Mr. Chair, if I might suggest, add to the list of what you get from us, our name to be on the selection committee. So Hardyville, Ridgeland County, and school board, along with their dates and their priorities, send in their name for Jim.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
When we send you the list of priorities, we should
Right.
also send you the name of the person we're nominating to be part of the evaluation committee for the manager that Jim requested.
Okay.
That should happen basically in the closeout of the, is someone going to record minutes for this committee, Mr. Chair?
Excuse me. You muffled on
Will
me.
we have, I'm sorry, I have a soft voice. Will we be recording minutes of this meeting at some point so that we have discussion that for people who are not viewing can have an idea of where we're going? Or will it
Wanda,
not be
you're
that?
taking the minutes, correct?
I'm taking the minutes for this meeting until y'all select someone to do it.
Wow.
Because with the county council minutes, I won't be able to keep up with all your minutes.
It's a lot.
We'll talk about it. So
Okay.
anyway,
Mr. Chairman, I have the last week of February. What would suit?
I'm open except for the Soloco meeting on Tuesday, the 25th, because I had to cancel my cruise because of my surgery. So I'm totally open.
Well, we have a school board association conference, our annual conference, February 20th. It goes on for that weekend. It goes Thursday, the 23rd, mandatory for me to attend anyway. So we won't be available that 20th all the way through to the 23rd.
For the last week, beginning with the 24th as Monday, what would work for you?
That's fine.
Um,
Beginning with the 24th would be fine. Any date, just let me know.
okay,
I'm
Mr.
ready for the
Kemp,
24th.
Mayor
Everybody
Williams,
else?
that works
And
for you?
I'm open the whole week except for the Soloco meeting on Tuesday, the 25th.
All right, February the 24th it is.
All right.
And what on the February 24th? What what's gonna happen? Just,
Mr.
We're gonna
Kemp, what I hope happens is that we bring you some recommendations on the Greenbelt side, that we'll at least have some information on the bonding front for you, and that we will receive and your 4 recommendations that you can discuss through and come up with a general recommendation for Jim so that he can get that part into the program management acquisition side.
also, who's gonna be on the committee?
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Who's going to be on the review committee? Jim, have you already reached out to the municipalities on that?
No, I
Okay.
have not. This was the first chance I had to mention it.
Very good.
Is it noon on the 24th? I'm sorry, I missed the timing.
It's the chairman's call.
Jimmy?
What time would you like to have the meeting on the 24th, Mr. Chairman?
1 o'clock?
Okay.
That works.
Okay, is that it? Any other final comments?
When do you need the names of the individuals for the recommendation on that evaluation matrix
As soon
committee?
as possible, not
Okay.
within the week,
Okay, jolly good. Thank you.
because I'll have it, if you send it to Andy, once he gets all the information, then he'll send it out to everyone. Is that okay, Andy?
Sorry, sir. Can you say that again?
When they send you in the priorities in the committee, get that information together and put it out to the committee prior to the meeting,
Yes, sir.
so we can keep them up to date. So when we get to the meeting, we're not looking at it 2 minutes before. So anyway, if there's no other comment, thank you very much for coming. I hope it was productive. At least I think it was.
Thank
And
you.
Big
I'll
first
see you
step.
on the 24th, if not before.
Great
Thank
first
very
you.
step. Thank you to Mr. Chair and Mr. Fulgham for putting this together quickly. I know you were accommodating my surgery schedule, so many thanks.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
sir.
Y'all enjoy the snow.
All
Did
right.
you?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Stay safe,
Have a
everyone.
great